Hey, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to learn what is a closure in JavaScript. So this is one of the most commonly asked question in JavaScript interviews, in front-end interviews, in full stack interviews. Yeah. So let's dive into it and see what exactly is a closure. Before that, I want you to know I have tried to make this video like 5 times and my laptop has crashed me every single time with a different reason. Sometimes it's an internet issue, sometimes the software crashes, sometimes there's a Windows update out of somewhere. Man, you don't know how much effort I take for you guys. So anyway, let us see what closure is. Okay. So we'll start off with an example. That way it will be way clear for you. So let's create a function called root function. All right, that sounds simple enough. Now we have a nested function inside it, right? Some also call it an inner function. So let's create an inner function. Okay, all right. So we now have an inner function. Let us return the reference of this inner function through the root function. So I do so by doing this. Cool. Now let's try to access the inner function outside of root. So to do that, I will just create a variable called fun, which will do something like this. Okay. So technically, I'm calling root function and I'm gaining access to the inner function that was declared inside it. Right. So at this point, fun is basically inner function. So if I call fun, I would be calling inner function. So let's do that as well. So let us call fun. Right. Now, before running this code, I would let us do a simple console log so that we know which functions are being called. So console log inner function, yeah, and console log outer function. And let us do a console log here called fun so that we know what is being called after or what is being called through fun and what is being called through the root function. So let us simply run it. And you can see that first the outer function is called because at this position we are calling the root function. So that's why this gets executed. Then you can see that fun is printed due to this particular line. And then inner function is called since fun is technically inner function. So that's why when I call fun, it goes inside inner function and executes this particular line. So this right here is a concept of inner function, not a closure, but an inner function. But the concept of inner function is tied very closely with the concept of closures. Now we will go and look what a closure is. Now to do that, what we need to do is let's create a variable. Let's create a variable and let this variable be boolean with a default value of true, right? Now this variable is declared in the scope of a root function, correct? I will be doing operations on this particular variable through the inner function. So for example, a variable, I will just toggle the particular variable. That should be simple. So if it is true, it will become false. If it is false, it will become true. That's it, nothing else. And also simply print it after an operation has completed so that we know what is the current value of variable and whether the operation took place or not. Okay, seems fine. Let us do fun a few more times then. Cool. So that we know that a toggling is happening. It goes from true to false, false to true, back to true again. And yeah, basically you get the idea. Now let us run this particular piece of code. Now you can see that here, when the first time an inner function was called, the value became false. Since it was initially true, it became false. Then the next time it became true, then the next time it became false. So basically the whole flow is working, right? So even though variable is declared in the scope of a root function, that is in the outer scope of inner function. So inner function's scope is this much, but it is still able to access something that was declared outside it, right? So this concept right here is called a closure. When a function is able to access components or entities that are in its outer scope. So function is able to access entities that are in its outer scope. Cool. So that right here is the magic. Now you might ask, Apurva, why do we need this, right? Why should I go through so much pain? And that is a very valid question. But did you observe here that the root function was called? So when a root function is called, you technically will not be able to access the variable since its execution has been completed. So for example, yeah. So for example, you have a function in which you do some operation, right? As soon as a function gets executed, everything that was declared, all the local variables, all the functions, all the entities that were declared inside that particular function are destroyed by the compiler after execution, right? So even though the particular, technically, the particular variable declaration that was done inside root should have been destroyed was not destroyed because the inner function had reference to it. So basically, even though the root function does not exist at this point, the variable that we wanted to do operations on was still available, and this created a persistent in data. So you can see that fun is remembering what is the state of variable previously. So initially it was true, then it became false, then it became true, and then it became false. So that means if you see it from this angle, the state of variable is becoming persistent, right? So since fun has a reference to variable, the the variable is not getting destroyed or garbage collected, if I might say, right? So yeah, that's the logic of a closure. A closure is basically an function that has access to variables outside it. And the benefit of a closure is that it helps you create, first, it lets you persist the state of the variables outside it. Second, it is a way to truly interact with a private variable such as this, right? Uh, in a very systematic manner. So for example, the user does not the in anybody else will not be able to simply do root function dot variable if this was declared privately, correct? So this would not be possible, but still if you have a closure in place, you would still be able to interact with the particular local variable that was declared in. So basically, yeah, that is the concept of closure. One last thing that you should remember is where and when to use closure. So closure should be used in cases where you want to persist a small amount of information, because if you persist a large amount of variables or entities, you might end up having a data leak or a crash out, right? Which is not something we want. Plus, you should use a closure when you want to basically provide access to your particular private variable, but in a restricted manner. That means you have decided what particular operations are legal or genuine on that particular value variable, and then you give access to those operations only through the form of inner functions and returning them as closures. So this is basically when you use a closure. And yeah, that's it. See you next time. Bye.